Are there anyone would like to take the floor? I would like to make a question, ask a question. Many, lots of information was expressed very quickly, and I have some information here with me. According to the information provided by Mr. McNamara, his appraisal on the number of missiles that were deployed in Cuba. Could you please repeat, Mr. McNamara, the number of missiles that were in Cuba? The warheads. How many? The number that you gave.
Mr. President, I said, and this is based on imperfect information we received in Moscow, and I think it was November 1992, and the information that we received, and it may be somewhat inaccurate, but I think in its impact and importance, it conveys the situation in Cuba in October 62. The information we received was that there were about 162 nuclear warheads, Soviet nuclear warheads, on the soil of Cuba in the missile crisis. Roughly 80 or 90 of those tactical warheads to be used against an invasion force, and some 70 to be used with respect to the missiles targeted on the U.S. I don't want to argue too much the accuracy of the figures, but whether they're plus or minus a small amount, I think they illustrate the nature of the problem. There was a very, very great danger of nuclear war under those circumstances, which, as you implied, would have destroyed Cuba, and which, as I said, I think would have, if not destroyed, at least seriously injured both the Soviet Union and the U.S. And I think that's the conclusion I come to, and I'm not sure General Gribkov would agree with that. I rather understood from him that the tactical nuclear warheads might not be used in the event of a U.S. invasion. I doubt that. We thought there were 10,000 Soviet troops there. There were 40,000. We were totally wrong. You said, I think, in an earlier meeting, there were 200,000 or 270,000 Cuban troops, and I think your words were, and I can well imagine it, determined to fight to the death. Now, if we'd come in there with this huge airstrike, the first day, 1,180 sorties, with 280,000 troops, there would have been very, very serious losses to Cuba and the Soviets from U.S. conventional warheads. I can't believe that under those circumstances, Moscow would not have authorized use of the tactical nuclear weapons. I don't know why the hell he sent them there, other than for that purpose.
And I would not like to abuse and with too many questions.
Вопрос, товарищ президент, хотел уточнить.
I would like to make a correction. Actually, with respect to,
Было завезено всего, как
yes, in total, as Mr. McNamara expressed, 160 warheads, of which 98 were unloaded, and 64 warheads had not been unloaded from the Alexandrov. There were nuclear warheads, LR-14, for a total of 162. And 98 had been unloaded from the boat. They were still in the boat. They had not been unloaded. They were already in Cuba, however, in the vessel, in the boat Alexandrov. They were still there.
Gustavo descarga.
Это, корабль этот был 23-го или 24-го.
On the 23 or 24, I don't remember exactly. The Alexandrov arrived to Mariel port bringing R-14 missiles with 24 warheads and the 40 drag missiles. These 64 warheads were still on the boat. And there was an order was received from Moscow to stop the unloading, not to unload the 64 warheads. And in the launching sites, there were 16 in 2 regiments. One was in the east and the other in the western part of Cuba. Each of the regiments had launching sites. And 40 drag missiles were planned for each of the regiments, which makes a total of 80.
Да.
Los 80. Bien. Cuando usted habla de
So 98 warheads. To what missiles? The ones that were unloaded, what weapon? For what weapon? The ones that were unloaded. Do you have the information in terms of the composition of the 98 warheads that were unloaded from the boat? This is no longer a military secret. No, Comrade Fidel, I will answer your question. It is not a secret. Everything I know, I have already said. R-12 with a range of 200 kilometers. 2,000 kilometers. 36 warheads, nuclear warheads. 40 missiles. 12 Luna missiles. And 6 atom bombs. Yes, for the IL-28 planes. There was a special squadron aside from the regiment. There was another squadron of IL-28. What missiles were not transported during the crisis? In other words, those that had the largest or the longest range. In other words, which of the weapons did not arrive to Cuba? 2 regiments. R-14. Two regiments. They were on the way at the moment of the crisis. Yes, at the beginning of the blockade. They were approaching the limits of the blockade, and they received the order to stop. So they were at sea, cruising, and then they received the order to return to the Soviet Union. These missiles, those were the longest range, yes, a range of more than 4,000 kilometers. And warheads? The nuclear warheads were in Cuba, but they were still on the boat. They had not been unloaded. And the warheads were at Mariel Port. Yes, all of them. All the warheads had arrived. They were in Cuba. Yes, all of them. It is curious. That is a very interesting data, information. 98 had been unloaded from the boat. And from 162, and the figure is correct. Yes, it is. It's correct. I also wanted to say that the power of the warheads 700 kilotons to 2.5 megatons. They were pretty big, huh? Now, a question. When you talk about correlation of force in terms of the number of missiles and warheads, this type of comparison is not usually made. The power of a nuclear warhead, is it taken into account when making the calculation, or when calculating the correlation of force? Perhaps you have not understood me. Yes, I understand. I've understood. Yes, I understood you, Mr. President. I understood your question. When you plan, you take into account the quantity or the amount. This is in the general planning. However, when you plan according to the objective or the target, then you take into account the power of the nuclear charge. I also wanted to add that during my intervention, I forgot to mention that during the crisis, not a single missile was charged with the fuel, nor were the warheads placed on the, nor were they given the order to fly. And the warheads were 750 to 250 kilometers away from the sites. At all moments, the warheads were away, separated from the missiles. They were at 250 meters, excuse me, kilometers. I don't understand. 250 meters. Only in the case of one regiment, as I expressed before. In the evening of October 27. Without the order from Moscow, one regiment on R-12, or the nuclear warhead, was placed on the missile while the rest were still in Bejucal. According to standards, procedures, in these cases, the reason for keeping the warhead apart from the missile, what are the reasons? Why, if you have a missile here, why is the nuclear warhead supposed to be 140 kilometers away? There must be some confusion. Nope. Mr. President, once again, this proves that the Soviet Union, the leadership of the Soviet Union, did not have any intentions to carry out an attack against the United States of America. And I repeat, during the time the missiles were in Cuba, not a single missile was in a vertical position. In other words, when the missile has been loaded with its fuel, when it has been coupled, when the warhead has been included, only then it is placed in a vertical position. And I repeat, not a single missile was ever in a vertical position here in Cuba. I repeat, never. Although in the film that the Americans made, and we saw the film in Moscow, then this picture shows that the missiles were in a vertical position. But I'm sure that this was taken from the missile that they have placed here in a museum in Cuba. I need minimum instructions in order to be able to understand how you operate a missile and how the nuclear warheads are coupled. I think that perhaps I just wanted, out of curiosity, scientific curiosity, to listen. But I think this point should be clarified for a better historical understanding, or understanding of history. Fernandez, you studied in a military academy. Perhaps you understand. But at that time, there were only mortars, no missiles.